It is the cube of Saturn.
Can be found in numerous symbols and emblems, corporate logos, movies, music albums, and even fashion. They're not simply representations, they're talismans.
Interestingly, the Kaaba's cubic shape and its central position resonate with Saturn's symbolism in various other cultures.
Whenever they had to sacrifice something or someone, they would put it on a cube-shaped altar. The offering would be burned, and after years of repeated sacrifices, the cube would turn black due to soot, smoke, and ash. That's how the black cube became a symbol of the time god Saturn.
Moloch was an ancient Canaanite deity, often depicted as a bronze, bull-headed idol with outstretched hands over a fire, usually associated with the practice of child sacrifice. The sun god was often represented in accordance to the current zodiac age, which 4,000 years ago was Taurus, the bull. In ancient Mesopotamia, Saturn was called Moloch, who used the term Bel or Baal, and to whom child sacrifices were made.
We told you to sacrifice the cow, and then you still disobeyed. And after this entire charge sheet, from ayah number 140, moving onwards, the issue is the change of the Qibla.
Yeah, that's it.
The change of the
That's
Qibla.
it. That's
And so,
it. Now,
and that was kind of like indication. Now, you're
It's over.
It's over.
it's over. Israel is now ish. It's reprobate, irredeemable. If you're not obedient, he will give you a charge sheet, and he will give you a term, and this is the sunnah of Allah. He never changes. And once that term is reached, you will be replaced by a people who are not like you.
As Klebansky, Panofsky, and Saxel noted, even St. Augustine had proclaimed Saturn to be the god of the Jews. The link can be seen in Abu Mashar's works, and sometime later, the Arab astrologer Al-Kabizi, or Al-Kabitius in Europe, attributed the, quote, faith of Judaism to Saturn in the 10th century, around the same time that Al-Qurtubi, writing in Islamic Spain, was authoring the Hayat al-Hakim.
All of these mysteries, as I've said before, are wrapped up with the mystery religion that began with Qabil's disobedience. So we come full circle here. They have enshrouded the Kaaba with this dark mystery. You see, this is the same cube that the Jewish man puts on his forehead, wraps around his arms, binds himself up in this mystery. This is the tying of the knots, okay? That's what they do. And that's what they do, you see? So when they're doing this, they're dedicating themselves to Baal, all right? Now, Baal can be traced to the ancient Mesopotamian religions. It can be traced to the pre-Dravidian religions.
Moshe Idel called the Saturnization of Judaism, and in turn, the Judaization of Saturn. By the end of this process, in the late 15th and 16th centuries, even European Jewish Kabbalists like Yohanan Alamano, working from earlier Spanish or Sephardic sources, were expressing the astromagical link between ancient history, the land of Israel, Moses, the temple, the Torah, prophetic inspiration, the Sabbath, and esoteric knowledge with Saturn.
Saturn is the center of the black sun. It's called the black sun because the redemption of the Jewish race depends upon them entering into the darkest human sins in order to find the lost spark of divinity that God lost in materialism. That's according to their theology.
A heretical movement of Judaism, which started with the declaration of a Jewish mystic and ordained rabbi named Sabbatai Zevi, who proclaimed himself Messiah in 1666. He proposed that through acts of sin, such as sexual immorality, one could be led to spiritual redemption and expedite the reconstruction of the temple, the same temple that the Knights Templar revered. And while his movement ended with his converting to Islam, continuing his esoteric practices in secret, many of his practices and beliefs continue until today, hidden in many of the world's mainstream religions. His name, Sabbatai, literally translates to Saturn.
They've already dedicated the Kaaba to this mystery. That's why it's Saturn.
It was Abraham and his son Ismail, peace be upon them, both who built the Kaaba.
The Kaaba remained for a long time in the same shape with the same structure built by Ibrahim alayhi salam. It was rectangular. And later on, something happened. The Kaaba was made into a cube.
Hajjaj then ordered that projectiles be fired into the haram, and so they would send catapults into the haram day in, day out, which eventually destroyed the Kaaba. It destroyed the walls of the Kaaba, and it had to be rebuilt. al-Malik Abdullah ibn Zubayr rebuilt the Kaaba in a rectangular fashion, based upon the instructions of his aunt Aisha, who told him that Rasulullah ﷺ had told her the original foundation of the Kaaba wasn't a cube, it was a rectangle. So Abdullah ibn Zubayr, he reconstructed the Kaaba as a rectangular shape, and he had two doors. The original Kaaba had two doors, one in front, one at the back. So he built it again based on the original design, and then put on top of it silk covering.
This is the way of Cain, the way of Kabil, because the kings of the earth are pirates. That's what they are. And that's who Qabil became because of the curse on him. In other words, the curse is that the earth does not cooperate with you, so you have to subsume the earth with false doctrines, and you have to subsume the Ummah with false doctrines in order to steal from them. And that's what's been done. Now, if you look at the Kaaba, what is it? It's not been restored. The Prophet was going to restore it, it was never restored. But the truth of the matter is that the Kaaba is sitting there, not in its original form. It's been transformed. It was transformed to a pagan building before the Prophet.
The Meccan people, they were pagans. They used to worship idols, and around the Kaaba there used to be 360 idols that people used to worship. So they ended up worshipping idols. That's why Allah the Almighty sent Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
What happened with the Arabs in Mecca after the Prophet's wonderful success and triumph was that the Arabs remained disobedient. And this is very clear in the history, once you study the history.
Now when they sent him, so after he completes the mission in Mecca by executing Abdullah and al-Zubayr, he's given control of Iraq. He began to speak, and he was very eloquent, very eloquent. So he says to them, "O people of Iraq, you hypocrites, you munafiqun, and you rebellious bunch." They had a reputation. One of the commanders, when he came back to Medina, they asked him about the people of Iraq, and he said, "Ahlul Iraq, shiqaq wal nifaq." Ahlul Iraq, shiqaq wal nifaq. That was something that was known or is characterized. The early historians mentioned that. So he says, "You people are hypocrites, and you are rebellious. Wallahi, I have longed to be put in charge. I've just been wishing for this day. I'll strike you with the arrows of discipline, so long as you persist in remaining in the valleys of mayhem."
This shape was not done by the Prophet. It is like, why would you do that?
It's a woman's vulva. So they have put the male and the female principle together.
Look at that. Look at
this. This is a woman's vulva. That's what it is. It was purposely done this way. No one in their right mind would do this unless they were doing something wicked and something to pervert the actual ritual meaning.
There are people out there that think Islam is a religion of Satanism because of these things.
Exactly. It's all fertility. All the ancient mystery religions were about fertility, you see. It was a fertility cult. It is still a fertility cult. And what stands atop the mosque and what stands atop that tower there above the clock, these are the ancient fertility symbols of the ancient fertility ritual. This is satanic. This is idol worship. That's what it is. The entire Ummah has been bamboozled. What they're doing here is they're mocking the Muslims.
Authority. Then we get to the charity. Don't give donations to the mosque. Some of the Saudis responded and said, yes, because we have official channels of ihsan and the like. I ask you, Muhammad, and I ask every Muslim listening, if you had the choice to give your money to the Imam of the mosque or to Muhammad bin Salman who tried to bring Nicki Minaj to Saudi Arabia, where would you prefer to give your money to? Then they talk about no iftar in the mosques. No one ever complains about the issue of cleanliness. It suddenly became an issue all of a sudden. Bin Salman says no iftar inside the mosque. And if they do iftar in the courtyard, no tents. I don't want families coming to join these tents and make it a festive occasion. behind these rules that sound sane are more sinister intentions. When bin Salman reduced the hours spent on Islamic education, he didn't say because I want to reduce Islam in the country. He said I want to promote critical thinking. He reduces the hours of Quran, reduces the hours of Islamic studies, reduces the sound of loudspeakers, bans loudspeakers for Quran, bans the broadcast of prayers that we all watch on our TikToks, on our Instagrams or the like. When we discover a new imam that we like and they discover, he bans all of that. Did he ban it for Sunnah? Did he ban it because... And that's the reason why in these rules you see the de-Islamization being pushed. One of the rules was, do not bring your kids to the mosque because they disturb the worshippers. So bin Salman does a giant raid at the gates of Mecca, in Jeddah. People are doing Umrah, less than 1 hour away. He brings Pitbull and whoever in giant raves, etc. And he wants to tell you, I don't want to disturb the worshippers.
Selfishness has been going on for a long time. And you can say that the whole process of our instruction here on earth and our trials on earth is to weed out the wheat from the chaff. That's what it's all about. So you can rest assured, dear brothers and sisters, that Mecca is under the control of the selfish ones. Okay?
No doubt.
And there's no doubt about that right now.
No doubt.
And these are the same people pushing the vaccine. Okay? So they are as far from Allah as the East is from the West.
Since 1985, Saudi Arabia has destroyed 98% of their historical and religious sites, the vast majority of which was in Mecca. If this number was 5 or 10%, you may be able to argue that there's no agenda. But at 98%, there's clearly something going on here. One researcher puts it as, it's as if they wanted to wipe out history.
If you remove the history, then you are removing the truth. And so that's the same as replacing the truth with a lie, because it's null. There's nothing there. Or you're going to replace it with something else, a false history. And that's what the Bolsheviks have been doing. You see, what they do, and these are Jews. There would be no Bolshevism if there were not Jews. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn and others have made it very clear that the predominant portion of the Bolsheviks were Jews. When they remove the history, they're removing the truth, and they're going to replace it with a false theology.
And I want to share with you a few more bits from this book, The Cult of the All-Seeing Eye, that again connects all of these threads together. This was written in 1960 by Robert Keith Spencer. A temple will be erected in Washington, D.C. for the citizen of the world to develop universal understanding in place of his national limitations. The futuristic building, characterized as a spiritual United Nations, will be a symbol of the brotherhood and sisterhood of mankind, according to the brochure issued from Temple Headquarters, Greenwich, Connecticut. A wing of this modern-day Tower of Babel will be accorded to each of the 6 international faiths: Hinduism, Judaism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Christianity, and Islam. The symbolism planned for the building dates back to the black magic practiced by the high priests of ancient Egypt. The building will contain a giant eye, a circular pool of water which reflects light beamed onto it by a dome faceted to resemble a many-colored diamond. In New York, the Friends of the Meditation Room have long met regularly in the United Nations Meditation Room. On April 24, 1957, when the Meditation Room was reopened, the late Dag Hammarskjöld, UN Secretary General, described this pagan stone as an altar to universal religion. The altar is the symbol of the God of all, he said. The Temple of Understanding also will have its meditation room to be known as the Hall of Illumination. There it is planned that the Illuminati, Masters of Wisdom, our leaders of the Temple of Understanding, will train the public in new humanistic cult. So this is the United Nations meditation room, and that black cube is the symbol that they were just talking about, that this would be the symbol of the God of all. And this is yet another way that we see clearly. These people are Luciferian. The cube itself is a symbol of Saturn. Saturn, of course, connects us back to Satan, or Saturnalia worship.
The point is, they changed the history, they erased the history, and that's what they're doing to Islam, and your Muslim leaders and scholars are letting them do it.
And it's not like they're always building new religious sites on top of these ruins either. More times than not, they're building hotels, resorts, and sometimes it's a lot worse. For example, they destroy the house of the Prophet's first wife in order to build public toilets. I mean, at this point, they're just being insulting. The destruction of Mecca is not a new phenomenon by any means. In fact, it has been an ongoing trend for nearly 1,000 years, dating as far back as 1205.
Arab nationalism emerged quite late in the Ottoman Khilafah as well. The Al-Saud tribe had been periodically rearing its head for a couple of 100 years, or 150 years at least, beforehand, rebelling against the Ottomans, even briefly taking Mecca and Medina, attacking Baghdad, creating all kinds of bloodshed, exploiting the link with the Muhammad bin Abd al-Wahhab, who had criticisms of the excesses as he saw them in the Ottoman state. Their initial rebellions were extinguished by Muhammad Ali Pasha from Egypt, but periodically they would rise again. And most histories of the Saudi kingdom and the Saudi tribe, I think a very good one is by Professor Madawi al-Rashid, illustrate the links to the British, so much so that after World War I, they were given preference over the Hashemite Sharif Hussein, who wanted to be the ruler over the Hijaz.
The opportunity to defeat the superior Ottoman forces came with World War I. In 1914, the Ottomans issued a jihad proclamation, calling on the world's Muslims to fight back against the British and other allied European powers who were threatening to destroy the caliphate. But Ibn Saud and the Wahhabis rejected this call for Muslim unity. In fact, Ibn Saud saw this as the perfect time to go the opposite direction and formalize an alliance with the British. In 1915, Ibn Saud signed the Treaty of Darin. This treaty made the Wahhabi Najd a British protectorate. The treaty formalized Ibn Saud and the Wahhabis as allies of the British against the Ottomans in World War I. As a reward for backstabbing the Ottomans, the British formally recognized Najd and offered it British protection. They also gave Ibn Saud a £20,000 loan and a shipment of arms, as well as a monthly stipend of £5,000. Isn't it amazing that just £5,000 a month is all it took for the Wahhabis to sell out the Ummah to the enemies of Islam? The Wahhabis knew the British were invading and massacring Muslims, burning down their homes and their mosques, but they sided with the British anyway.
Their goal is perfect selfishness. They want to perfect selfishness, and Satan has them convinced that they will rule with him in hell in a new kingdom as the perfect man, the perfect selfish one, you see. And this is the one who has all the attributes of the false noble. This is the one who kills without remorse.
The fatwa states that Ottoman Sunni Muslims are all kafir murtads. Furthermore, their level of kufr is worse than that of Jews and Christians who are standard kafirs, or what they term kafir asli. This is exactly the twisted logic of Ibn Abdul Wahhab, who said that the Sunni Muslims of Syria, Egypt, Iraq, Yemen, Mecca, and Medina were all mushriks worse than Abu Jahl. Why? Because some people in those places have Sufi practices like istighatha. Therefore, because of auto takfir and chain takfir, they're all mushriks worse than Abu Jahl. In 1923, Ibn Saud's paramilitary gangs shot dead over 3,000 Yemeni pilgrims who were heading towards Mecca to perform the annual Hajj. When the Yemenis arrived in the southern provinces, one of Ibn Saud's gangs started shooting the pilgrims, killing 3,105 of them. This massacre is documented in the book The Great Massacre of Pilgrims by Professor Hamoud al-Ahnoumi. Professor Ahnoumi claims that this massacre took place for a number of reasons. Ahnoumi says that Ibn Saud did not want the Yemenis to interfere with his plans to conquer the Hijaz in alliance with Britain. Ahnoumi also says that this massacre was a British acceptance test for Ibn Saud, so that Ibn Saud could prove to the British that he was willing to do anything they asked. Britain was preparing Ibn Saud to be its first man and main agent in the region, who would implement its disruptive and differentiating project, but it wanted him to carry out an acceptance test that would qualify him to be its man who could carry out an ugly thing it asked of him. At the time of Ibn Saud, another Wahhabi massacre took place in Ta'if. As mentioned earlier, in 1803, there was an infamous massacre in Ta'if, which saw the Wahhabis kill 200 Sunnis. In 1924, they carried out another massacre, where they massacred 500 Sunnis. Then they robbed the remaining residents, leaving them no food. As a result, thousands starved to death.
So these things did happen. And in fact, there is a book, Ibn Ghanam, Tariq Najd, we're going to cover that later on in the book recommendations. It's very clear. There's no, if anybody says to you, well, it's not true, they were all mushrikeen, it wasn't the way it was, there were numbers or less, go and read Ibn Ghanam. Because he's not apologetic about what they did. Go and read his book. And he was a contemporary, he was a follower, he was alive, an eyewitness. And he wrote from the ground what happened. There was a lot of bloodshed. And we should not try to sugarcoat it and try and hide it. It happened. Okay. But at the same time, with the legitimacy and the backing, the Al Saud were able to also gain territory, and there were certain things they were able to gain legitimacy because they had the Sheikh and his followers and his children later on to back them up. So this alliance was very, very convenient for both parties. But it began in 1744 with the first Saudi state.
The official story is that this was a gift to the faithful. More space for more pilgrims. At least that is the official story. Because to put it there, something older had to come down first. Mecca, 2002. On a rocky spur called Bulbul Hill, looking down on the Grand Mosque, stood an Ottoman fortress called Al-Hajjaj. It had been built around the 1780s to guard the Kaaba from raiders, and it had watched over the holy city for more than 200 years. There's a detail here worth sitting with. An earlier Saudi king had once given that fortress to the Grand Mosque as a religious endowment, a gift meant to last. In January of 2002, crews moved in anyway. Workers drilled into the old domes from above, and over about 9 days, the fortress came apart. Then the hill it sat on was leveled too. What replaced the fortress is difficult to overstate. The complex is called Abraj al-Bayt, 7 towers sharing one enormous base, with around 1.5 million square meters of floor space. The central tower holds a 5-star hotel, finished with a spire and a golden crescent that pushed the structure past 600 meters. From the plaza below, those pilgrims circle the Kaaba in white in the permanent shadow of a structure that makes the ancient mosque beside it look small.
And the Prophet told us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that in Najd, the horns of the devil would come up.
The pattern reaches back to the 1920s, when the early Saudi state leveled the domed tombs of 2 ancient cemeteries, one in Medina and one here in Mecca, burial grounds that hold relatives and companions of the Prophet. What is happening beside the Grand Mosque today is that same logic, scaled up and aimed at a whole city. The list of what is gone is long and specific. Several of the early mosques tied to the Prophet's closest companions. The old Ottoman porticos inside the Grand Mosque, 3 centuries old, and columns around the Kaaba said to date back more than 1,000 years, all cleared during expansion work. A small handful of structures from the time of the Prophet still survive, and that Mecca and Medina are, by his measure, almost finished as historical places. He has described the sanctuary being turned into something closer to a machine. Irfan al-Alawi, who ran a foundation devoted to protecting Islamic heritage, counted the losses in the hundreds. The specific examples they point to are the part even some defenders struggle with. The house associated with the Prophet's wife Khadijah was built over and now lies beneath public lavatories. The site linked to one of his companions became a hotel. The home of his uncle was cleared for another. The spot long honored as the Prophet's own birthplace was converted, at one stage, into a library, and remains under pressure even now. Whole older neighborhoods of Mecca, the modest lodgings ordinary pilgrims once used, have been pushed out to make room for towers most of them could never afford to enter.
The worst places in the sight of Allah are the marketplace, and the best places in front of Allah is Mecca. And you have this energy of spirituality, but now you connected the worst place. You leave the shopping mall, you come from that tower, right, where the horn of the devil is, you come down, and you go pray, and then you go back to the marketplace. And so it's made into a place of tourism and a place to not be spiritual. This was supposed to be a place to worship, not a place to put up hotels where the rich are in one place, the poor are in another place, middle class in another place. What's the point then? The spirit of Hajj has been taken away so badly. And then you got these symbols of the devil on top to honor the devil. So instead of worshipping one Allah, you're partly, you are honoring the devil, at least in the eyes of the devil.
While the hotels were filling with pilgrims, the same contractor was still at work right next door, enlarging the Grand Mosque itself. The company behind nearly all of it was the Saudi bin Laden Group, the kingdom's construction giant. On September 11th, 2015, a storm rolled over Mecca. One of the towering cranes standing over the expansion site toppled and tore through the roof of the mosque, down into the crowd below. More than 100 people were killed. Later, a courtroom tried to settle who was responsible. The first ruling, in 2017, cleared the company and a dozen others completely, calling the collapse an act of God brought on by the storm. The verdict was challenged and dragged back and forth for years. A later appeals ruling reversed course and found the company negligent, fining it around $5 million. For a firm working on projects worth billions, that is the kind of figure that barely registers. The families were told no blood money was owed. The story of that company did not end there, and it is its own quiet lesson in who really holds the holy city. For generations, the Saudi bin Laden Group had been the royal family's favored builder, holding a near monopoly on the giant projects at Mecca and Medina across one reign after another. The firm carries the bin Laden name, though it stresses it has no connection to the man the world knows that name for. After 2015, its fortunes turned. In November of 2017, the company's chairman, a half-brother of Osama bin Laden, was swept up in a wide anti-corruption purge ordered by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, detained in a Riyadh hotel alongside more than 200 princes, ministers, and tycoons. Within months, the family agreed to hand a large stake in the company, more than a third of it, over to the state.
The term Salafi and the Salafiyya, and that terminology came from Muhammad Abd and his thinking. Abdu was the one who went to Europe and said, I found Islam in Europe. I posted that last week, people went crazy. He came back and said, we need to go back to Islam from the basics, Quran and Sunnah. If you don't believe what I'm saying, go into the archives. We need to leave the superstitious teachings of the people of Tasawwuf and the people of tradition. Let's go back to the Quran and Sunnah, and let's go back to using our independent judgments. That idea and the way it was formulated came from him. His student was who? Who was Abdul's student? Rashid Rida. So Abdul comes back. His teacher is who? Let's go back. Who's his teacher? Who's Abdul's teacher? Who's his mentor? Al-Afghani. Right? He was a Freemason. Yes. So was Abdul a Freemason. Abdul comes back to the East and he begins to preach this idea of let's go back to the Quran and Sunnah. Muhammad Abdul, his student is Rashid Rida. Rashid Rida of all of the three, so you have Al-Afghani, you have Abdul, you have Rida. Rida was the most traditional, was the most, you could almost say the most orthodox.
Who was given the rights to redesign Mecca, to remove the pillars of the devil and put one of them as a stake on Arafah. It was none other than an Israeli Jewish man named Norman Foster. And in fact, there were complaints. One of the architects, Muslim Sami Angawi, an expert Saudi architect, said he was surprised and upset to learn of confidential plans leaked last week, in which the holiest Islamic city would be redesigned by outsiders. And who were those outsiders? None other than Norman Foster and partners. You put this in the hands of who? That place where non-Muslims are not allowed, you're going to take the last major ritual, which is the Jamarat, the last major ritual that has to be done in the hands of people that have agendas, plain and simple. And if you can't see it, you're demented. That's all I got to say. Because the Prophet told us that the Dajjal will try to enter Mecca. The Shaitan's there already, full force. And the Qarn of Shaitan, the two horns of Shaitan are there.
Ramayana and Mahabharata, two of the greatest epics from India, will soon be taught in the schools of Saudi Arabia. This decision has been taken under the Vision 2030 initiative of the Saudi Crown Prince. It's a big step towards inclusiveness, a significant message of coexistence, and a clear reminder of the organic relationship India shares with the Saudi kingdom.
Art rises in Saudi desert, shadowed by politics. Okay, go. This is the New York Times. Okay, go to that article. Okay, so what's this? Who knows what these satanic things are? Here are the artists, you know, the artists in Saudi Arabia posing. Okay, they do this weird, like, abstract art. And then, I don't know, these are witches, I guess. Art in the desert, and then you have the statue. You have the blue idol here. Nejma, she placed 1,000 suns on the transparent overlays of space by the American artist Lita Albuquerque. Okay, this is a sculpted woman. Saudi official expressed reservations about its form-fitting outfit. So even the Saudi officials are acknowledging this. They're saying, well, the clothes are a little too tight. But yeah, they erected this statue, this woman praying to the stars. The idol worship happening in Saudi. So look, you know, you want to be consistent. You want to bash the Ottomans because they had music. And this, by the way, this is near Medina. According to the map, this is near Medina. So
الآن تشارك السعودية في ضرب المسلمين في العراق بالقنابل المدمرة، تتعاون مع الأمريكان اليهود واليهود الذين استولوا على فلسطين بمساعدة البريطانيين والأمريكيين. أصبح من آثار استجلاب الكفار إلى بلاد السعودية أن يقاتل السعوديون معهم المسلمين، وهذه يعني مصيبة الشهر.
أنني أقول أن جذب السعوديين، والحق يقال جذب السعوديين أو الحكومة السعودية للصليبيين إلى بلادهم وباختيارهم هو شر أكبر من اعتداء العراقيين على الكويت. هذا قلته أكثر من مرة، والآن أختم هذه الجلسة بهذه الكلمة، فأقول إن جلب السعوديين أو الحكومة السعودية، لأني سأقول كلمة مضطرا إليها بعد أسف بيان الحقيقة، كما أن حزب البعث العراقي لا يمثل الشعب العراقي، كذلك الدولة السعودية لا تمثل الشعب السعودي بمن فيهم من أهل العلم والفضل والصلاح والتقوى. فسياسة الدول أو الحكومات العربية اليوم لا تلتقي مع رغبات الشعوب المسلمة. وأخذ مثالا لا يختلف فيه مشايخ السعوديين اليوم، انتشار التماثيل والصور في الدوائر الحكومية، التي هذا الانتشار الذي ينافي دعوة التوحيد وينافي ما كان يقوله ولا يزال يقوله رجال التوحيد. فهذا كله يمثل أن الدولة في كل الشعوب الإسلامية لا تمثل شعوبها. وعلى ذلك أنا أقول أن استجلاب الحكومة السعودية للحكومات الصليبية، مع أنه لم يصدر من الشعب السعودي وإنما صدر من الدولة السعودية، فهو شر من استيلاء العراق على الكويت. وأيضا هذا الاستيلاء لم يكن من الشعب وإنما من الدولة التي لا تمثل الشعب. انظروا الآن كيف الشعوب في ناحية والدول في ناحية أخرى.
The idolatry crept in through the brethren of purity relatively soon, 200 or 300 years after the Prophet. Of course, the groundwork was already there. The division was already there. The Ummah never unified. The Quraysh won the battle that the Prophet had succeeded in overtaking. They regained the throne within one generation of his death.
Al-Hashim, his son is Abdul Muttalib. His brother Abdul Shams also has a son. His name is Umayyad. The Umayyad dynasty is named after this man here, Umayyad. Not Muawiyah, but Umayyad. And Umayyad was very jealous. So he began to challenge his uncle. And one day says to him, I'm going to challenge you, and if I win the challenge, I'm going to be the ruler, and you have to leave. The competition happened, of course, Hashim won, Umayyad lost. He had to pay the 50 camels, and on top of that had to leave. Where did he go to? Can anyone tell me where he went? He had to leave Mecca. He had to leave the Hijaz for 10 years. Where did he settle? Can anyone tell me? Or hazard a guess? Yes,
obviously.
yes. So the Umayyads, Banu Umayyad, so from that moment onward there was now a rift. A second rift happened between Banu Hashim and Banu Umayyad. So Banu Umayyad held a grudge. Umayyad held a grudge that his children, he had a son called Harb, and Harb had a son called Abu Sufyan, and a daughter called Jamil. And who was Jamil married to? Abu Lahab. Tabbat yada Abi Lahabin wa tab. The woman mentioned, she was the sister of Abu Sufyan, the granddaughter of Umayyad. Yeah? So the picture begins to make sense now. So that part of the family held a grudge. He has so much rancor towards him because of this tribal hatred that he inherited from his grandfather Umayyad. So Banu Umayyad is where we get the name the Umayyads. In fact, in Arabic, we don't say the Umayyads, sometimes Amawiyin, but we say Banu Umayyad. And they established themselves where their forefather went in exile to Damascus. So that connection to Damascus was a long one. It didn't begin afterwards. It began a long time ago. And Banu Hashim, the children of Hashim, established. Who were the children of Hashim? Which empire became Banu Hashim, by the way?
Abbasids.
Aywa, Abbasid. And they went to Baghdad. Okay? So this is the genesis of the two empires. And Umayyad ruled for 90 years, Banu Umayyad, and they were then removed by Banu Hashim. Okay? So that's internal rift continued up until Hussein, who was a Hashimi, and Yazid, who was an Umayyad, crossed paths, and we know how that ended. Okay? So the psyche of the Umayyad has to be understood to begin with. The psyche they come with. And you'll find later on, for example, Muawiyah, when he was a Khalifa, when he was a governor, he would take Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein as children, and they would wrestle with some of his children. And he would say certain things, certain comments, certain snide comments, like you're the son of the, you're the son of a wolf, or a son of a wolf. Like he would make snide comments towards Hassan and his children, right? So they had this mentality of just constant comparison and constant like envy towards the Banu Hashim, and it will stop them from accepting the message. But eventually, إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح, they had no choice. And look at the Prophet ﷺ, to honor them, he said, whoever enters the house of Abu Sufyan is safe. He's constantly trying to give them props, right? But they were always kind of reticent, until eventually there was no choice but to join. Okay? Which is why some historians, even contemporary historians, Abu Ala al-Ma'dudi for example, they say the Umayyad Banu Abd Shams were not sincere because they had the competitive edge within them. And that continued through to the point in which Muawiyah becomes Khalifa. It never stops.
هذه الفئة خلينا نرجع لها مرة ثانية. من هي؟ وليش ظهرت أصلا؟ وهل هم حقا سلفيين؟ هل هم حقا يعني ينتسبون للسلفية والسلفية الحقيقية، ولا هم ينتسبون لها يعني أحيانا حق وأحيانا باطل؟
نعم.
لهم خصائص راح أذكرها على السريع يا شيخ. تفضل. إذا أمهلتني. تفضل. راح أذكر 10 كاملة إن شاء الله. هم أولا يتهمون غيرهم من أكثر الجماعات بأنهم خوارج. اختلفت معه أنت خارجي. زعل عليك أنت من الخوارج. انتقدت أي حاكم، الحاكم إذا سمح لك حتى. انتقدني في البرلمان، انتقدني في بأسلوب معينة، انتقدت حاكم صرت من الخوارج. رحت وقفت في اعتصام في مكان صرت من الخوارج. يا أخي ذكرت لك رأي صرت من الخوارج. المشكلة هؤلاء ما أدري درسوا ولا ما درسوا. من هم الخوارج أصلا؟ الخوارج لهم أصول عقائدية، يرتبط الأمر بالإيمان، مفهوم الإيمان. الإيمان عند الخوارج جزء واحد ما يتجزأ، يأتي كله ويذهب كله، ولهذا عندهم من زنى كفر.
لا هم يقصدون الخروج على ولي
هذا الغريب، الخروج على ولي الأمر لا يرتبط بعقيدة الخوارج. قد يخرج على ولي الأمر إنسان وليس بالضرورة من الخوارج،
لأنه هم يعتبرون كل هذه التصرفات هي نوع من أنواع الفتنة.
الفتنة موضوع ثاني. أتكلم عن الفتنة خلها أجل شوي. نتكلم عن الخوارج أول شيء.
نعم.
هل كل من خرج على حاكم فهو من الخوارج؟ هذا مشكلة، يظهر أنه ما فهم شنو معنى الخوارج ولا أصول الخوارج ولا عقيدة الخوارج.
نعم.
هذه أول نقطة، لازم أن يرجعوا إلى تعلم العقيدة الصحيحة في البداية.
الفرق بين عقيدة الخوارج وبين
من فعل بعض أفعالهم، وبهذا المفهوم راح نطلع بعض الصحابة من الخوارج، بعض التابعين نخليهم من الخوارج، يطلع سعيد بن جبير من الخوارج، يطلع عبد الله بن الزبير يطلع من الخوارج، يطلعوا كثير من الأئمة الهدى من الخوارج.
Abdullah ibn Zubayr ruled for 9 years. He had Mecca, he had the Hijaz, he also had Egypt. His brother was there, so he had power, he had influence, legitimacy. He had bay'ah. So it's the Marwanids who actually disobeyed in that instance. Likewise, when Ali was Khalifa radiallahu anhu, Muawiyah refused to give bay'ah. So how far do you want to go back? Or does it only begin when Muawiyah is Khalifa? Suddenly now we have to obey everyone who has a stake in Khilafah. No. The refusal of giving bay'ah began with Ali radiallahu anhu, when he was legitimately the Khalifa of all the Muslims.
This is a real serious problem, this darkness. And this darkness is represented by the black cloak over the Kaaba. That's what it's represented by. This is the cube of Saturn that we're talking about here. This is disobedience. This breaks the contract. This breaks the covenant. Mecca is under the control of the selfish ones.